So I want to now introduce to you to speak one of the advisory board members of the Foundation for the Revival of Classical Culture, but actually back in 1988, 89, a mutual friend of ours introduced us, and he was one of the first people to work on and to actually present what was then referred to as the lower tuning, the Verdi tuning actually, in concert opera performance. In fact, it was, I think, in New Jersey we did that, and took an orchestra which was not entirely cooperative, tuned it down to 435, and began the process which you're seeing another evolution of today. This is Tony Morss, who was conductor from 1959. I think he just retired from conducting about a year ago. And he's been a friend of the Schiller Institute, worked with us since 1988, 89, that period, and is now diligently working to do everything he can to advocate the idea of proper tuning, but more than that, the idea of the proper idea of the relationship between art, science, and life. Tony?
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Dennis originally asked me to speak on the topic of saving grace, saving voices, and I think that is a very good title for what we're going to do. I'm going to give you some background of the historical situation in tuning, which is far more chaotic than most people imagine. And this is something that we have been advocating for a great many years. We're preaching to the converted in many cases here. But if the territory seems very familiar to you, it helps to remember that wonderful old French saying that to be a success in society, one has to be very happy to learn many things that one already knows very well. It's not at all surprising that when the high art music of the Renaissance and Baroque was emerging, Europe was so politically divided and communication so slow that there was no consistent tuning pitch anywhere. This situation continued well into the 19th century. Different cities tuned to different pitches, and different churches within the same city tuned to different pitches. Since the most important music was overwhelmingly vocal, sometimes the only real clues in knowing where to tune came from the range of the vocal parts. Voices do have limitations, especially those of church singers, not always professionally trained. The various tuning pitches were almost always lower than modern tuning, an extreme example being the prestigious Paris Opera. At the time, several of Gluck's operas were premiered there. It is known that the tuning at the Paris Opera was then a minor third lower than modern A440. Music written in F major would thus sound to modern ears written in D major. The only solution for a modern performance would be to transpose the whole opera down a minor third, because you're not going to train musicians to tune a third lower or a fourth lower. Otherwise, some of the solo tenor parts, particularly which are written rather high, would be excruciating. I, at one point, conducted a tenor in several performances of Rigoletto. He was a wonderful duke, and his career was taking off. He got hired by the Paris Opera to do one of the two operas that were premiered of Gluck in that time. I forget whether it was Iphigénie en Lice or Iphigénie en Tauride. It was one of them. And he came to me, he was looking over the score, and he said, "It's cruel. The notes are so high. I can hit all the notes, but where the music lies, it stays up there just forever and ever and ever." Neither one of us at that time knew that particular opera house tuned a minor third lower. So the range wasn't so extreme. If you look at music written for different municipalities, you get the idea that one composer was interested in nothing but the low notes of the voice, and another composer nothing but the high. No, what's happening is that if you were a practicing musician in a town that tuned low, you would write higher pitches to drag the actual notes sung into a medium, normal range. So all composers were actually looking for the same tessitura, the same territory of how the music lies. And they wrote it differently because the tuning was different. But the notes were the same. The actual extreme high notes and extreme low notes didn't come into musical practice until the end of the 18th century. One thinks of Osmin in the Seraglio with his high F sharp and his low D below the staff. And you think of the Queen of the Night, who's popping up to Fs over high C. Well, Mozart was dealing with extraordinarily gifted people, and he was writing music to show off what they could do, often at their insistence specifically. And so those operas or concert pieces then became very difficult to cast because these were unusual voices that was being written for. By the way, during this period, Rome used the same tuning as the Paris opera, down a minor third for modern pitch. Naples was a half a tone even lower than that. And Venice tuned to modern 440. They like things sharp. Well, most emphatically, one size does not fit all. Today, we face the choice of where to tune in order to do justice to the standard repertory. Bach and Handel both worked in some cities where the pitch was a whole tone down from 440, and later on in places where it was only half a tone down. Bach in Leipzig was constrained by the fact that the organs, both in the Thomaskirche and in the Niklauskirche, for which he was responsible, had organs tuned to a semitone above 440, 465. Now, you can transpose an organ down, but only by half steps. That's all you got to work with. So the German public liked the sound of very sharp organs, a kind of a crash and a buzz that you got from an attack. They liked that, but the choirs didn't want to sing up there. So Bach's arrangement was not untypical in Leipzig, that the organ part was perpetually transposed down when it performed with the singers. If Bach was at 415, which is the semitone below 440, then the organ part was transposed. Actually, it wasn't transposed, it was written out a whole tone lower. That is to say, if the cantata were in D minor for the strings and the woodwinds and the brass and the timpani, the organ part was actually written out in C minor. Although any proper organist could have transposed it easily, Bach happened to write it out in the whole tone lower, so that was he would hook up with his choir and the rest of the orchestra. Laboratory tests conducted in the 19th century and repeated in the 20th, including by the legendary Amadeus Quartet's first violinist Norbert Breinin, also in collaboration with the Schiller Institute, confirmed that the great stringed instruments of the old Italian masters, such as Stradivarius, Guarneri, and Guadagnini, achieved their maximum resonance, which is to say their maximum roundness and sweetness and beauty of tone, somewhere between 427 and 432. All those tests agreed. Actually, 432 is ideal because it derives from middle C at 256, which is a major scientific constant. I'm informed, not being a physicist, I have to take this on faith, that the characteristic vibratory rates of the subatomic particles are all within the same scale of values as 256. The universe is singing basically to all the same tune. The most compelling reason to tune at 432, championed by the great Giuseppe Verdi himself, is not just its scientific and theoretical significance, but rather the extremely obvious gain in beautiful tone for stringed instruments, as we have seen, and of course even more important for the singing voice. Nor is this improvement noticeable only to connoisseurs. The average concert goer is immediately aware of the added glow of warmth and mellowness, especially if there is an opportunity to compare directly with the modern higher tuning. Such an opportunity was provided in April of 1993 by the Schiller Institute during a seminar conducted by the renowned Italian tenor Carlo Bergonzi at New York's Carnegie Hall in the Weill Recital Hall. And it was entitled, Save the Art of Bel Canto, Return to the Verdi Tuning. A parade of singers of all voice categories each sang an aria with the piano tuned to 440 and then repeated it with a different piano tuned to 432. Both singers and public found this comparison startlingly favorable to the 432 tuning. One can build wind and brass instruments to tune up at any pitch one chooses, but the human voice cannot be so tuned. The great Italian maestro Tullio Serafin deplored the modern high tuning at 448 and up sharply from there, and prophesied that if it continued, it would result in what he called the death of the Italian lyric theater, that is to say, the opera. This high tuning is currently burning out voices, shortening careers, and forcing opera companies to cast lighter lyric voices with easy high notes in roles demanding darker and heavier voices, ones that can no longer reach the now too high top notes. No matter how supportive the conductors may try to be in keeping down the orchestral accompaniments for lighter voice singers, the heavy orchestrations meant to support heavier voices will eventually destroy the lighter voices, which are in any event all the wrong color for the heavy roles and thus seriously misrepresent the music that they're singing. A very close friend of mine, who I've conducted in more operas than I can count, made part of her career in Europe, and she was engaged in Bulgaria to sing both in Sofia and in Varna. She was singing Aida and Tosca. And she had big success, but it was killing her. And she said to her husband, who was not only an operatic tenor, but also a piano technician, "What's the matter with this house? I can't float my soft high C in the O Patria Mia in Aida. I have to yell it as loud as I can yell in order just to make the pitch at all. What's going on here?" He said, "My dear, every last one of the rehearsal pianos in this opera house is tuned to 451. Well, she said to the orchestra, they wanted her to come back to sing Elisabetta and Don Carlo. She said, "I will come back if you can get your orchestra down to 440. And they couldn't. They could not. And one of the prospects that we have is arranging workbooks for the wind instruments and the woodwinds and brass to teach them how to alter their instruments so that they can play, actually go back and forth between playing modern pitch and playing the ideal pitch, 432. Give you an example. We have engaged players who can do this and have found how to do it. So it's not that nobody knows. Our first bassoon, Matthew, Ogden, Matt Ogden, yes, delightful fellow. He worked something out with the builder of his own wonderful bassoon, which is a German Heckel, to have them make a larger mouthpiece. And since bassoonists and oboists cut their own reeds, he cut himself a reed that was slightly bigger and thicker. And the instrument plays perfectly well, perfectly easily, and that's all that had to be done. I suspect the oboes and the clarinets are going to be more difficult. But anyway, that's the sort of thing that works out. I'm just the coda to my tale about my friend who was faced with 451. The opera houses that wanted to engage her to sing Elisabetta hired, instead of her real spinto voice, hired a light lyric voice, which is not right for Elisabetta at all. And that's where this is seriously misrepresenting the color of the music. Whichever tuning most favors the human voice has got to be the standard one for all music, with due exceptions made for the transposition of music composed to be performed at startlingly lower tunings. But for the vast majority of works in the standard repertory, it will be found that they are best served by the 432 tuning. And I think we've had a very graphic illustration of that this afternoon. Thank you very much.